Hey, what's up? Mr. Bill here. Today I'm going to be breaking down my remix of Fork Funeral from Virtual Riot. So the first thing here, the way I have the session set up, and this is the way I set up most remix sessions, is I'll kind of just have the stems that the person sent me down here in a folder, and that way if I ever need anything, I can just kind of grab it from here and pull it up into my sort of work area. And then I usually will have the original version of the track down here just so I can kind of reference between that and then what I'm working on as well. And that way it just kind of, sometimes it's easy to sort of veer off path too much and just go down some rabbit hole. So it kind of helps me be able to sort of reference the original and make sure that I'm sort of doing the original justice. So yeah, basically I have these down here, and then on these group, on the stem group and the reference channel, I have these going out, external out 1 and 2, and that way it just skips the master completely, so none of my master processing is going to be affecting those things. And I can explain my master processing here in a bit, especially this transient re-adder thing, which is kind of interesting, I think. So let's get into it. So the first interesting thing about this is actually a Virtual Riot sound, which is this acid sound here. It's kind of like the main sound of really the song, and that sounds like this. And the way that this sound is working is it's pretty much just this auto filter running into a saturator and an OTT. If you remove the auto filter from the equation, you just get this. So it's basically just like a distorted saw wave or something like that. Oh, let's actually check. Okay, I guess it's a saw wave. And that's basically it. It's a saw wave with an auto filter on it running into a distortion. And if you remove these things from the equation, then you get this. So yeah, saw wave with a little bit of noise. And so what this auto filter is doing is it's a bandpass filter, and the frequency of it is being automated, and that's what's changing the note. So it's basically all the same note, but depending on what this frequency is depends on what note comes out the other end, because you're basically boosting that frequency into a distortion and an OTT. So if I just sort of scroll through this cutoff here while it plays, you'll see what I mean. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and I tried to sort of make my own version of that for the remix with sort of, I messed around with the notes a bit, I messed around with the automation a bit, and I ended up with this. And for basically the first half of the time that I was working on this remix, I worked on it for about a week or so. And for like the first half of the week, that was going to be like the main acid sound. It was going to be kind of a take on Virtual Riot's acid sound. And then at some point I decided he kind of nailed it with his one, so I'm just going to use his one. But yeah, I'll show you what it sounds like with that anyway. It sounds like a little tighter, and it's kind of interesting in its own way, but I think that Val really nailed it with his one, so I just ended up using his one. So that's kind of like, yeah, the first interesting thing about it. I'll talk about this transient re-adder thing because that's kind of interesting. So for the drums, I used the kick, the original kick from the tune. I just sort of went and cut it from one of these stems here. Like I just grabbed one of these kicks and I think just consolidated it and then dragged it into a simpler. And then for the clap, I'm using a Sultan clap for the transient, which sounds like this. So that's kind of just the transient, and then I'm using a Eli sample, Eli derp for this noise layer, and then I'm using a medicine clap for the clap layer. And then if you play them all together, you get this kind of nice meaty clap. And then with the kick under it, it sounds quite nice, I think. So what I'm doing here with this transient re-adder thing on the master, which is off right now because it gets kind of annoying if you have it on while you're writing, is I have the input from the kick. I think this is the kick we're working with now. So I have a compressor and I have it on sidechain mode, and then I have this little audition thing turned on, and what that does is it allows you to audition the incoming signal that you've set here. So if I just solo this and turn these off, we get this. I'm getting the actual kick sample playing on the master. And then if I put Shaper Box on here, and I believe I just have this set to audio, what this is doing is it's set to 128th notes, and it's just creating an envelope down really quickly. So it's basically just going to like gate the transient, or gate everything else but the transient. So you just get the transient of that drum, and then I'm just cutting the lows of that. And I'm doing that with the clap as well. So then pretty much what I have here is I have the kick transient and the clap transient, and then I have the original signal here, which is just the dry signal, except this has the opposite thing going on. Every time a transient happens, it ducks the signal. It's basically like side chaining out that transient. So you can hear when I play that, it's got no transients if I have this soloed. So if I put all these together, you get basically this accentuated transient thing going on. And then I have the level here. So if I turn these all the way up, you'll hear it sounds like very poppy, like there's too much transient maybe. So the reason I'm doing this is because I'm basically destroying the signal here with this K clip, which is kind of just like squashing everything together. You can see every time a kick or a snare happens, it sort of crushes it. So what I'm doing here is I'm re-adding the transients after the clipping is happening to basically take all of those transients that were crushed and add them back on top again. And then after that, I'm just doing some light limiting. So yeah, it's basically a way to sort of add transients back in and have them be clean after your clip signal. I started doing this because I heard that what Noisia used to do, or maybe still do, is they would clip the fuck out of their song, and then they would re-import that master back into their session, and then they would get the kick and the snare, and they would just cut the transient off all of the kicks or of the snares, and they would basically go through their mastered wave file and paste the transients back in one by one. And it sounds smart. I mean, it makes sense. But I was like, I'm too lazy to do that. So I built this rack instead, which just automatically puts the clean transients back in after the clipping. So yeah, that's kind of another interesting thing about this remix. So this second drop is probably my favorite drop of the track, and I'll just play it real quick. My DJ. So what's going on here is I have a sub, and this MIDI clip I got off Virtual Riot himself, just so I could have the exact same pitch bend movement that he had in the original. So the sub is just doing this. And then I have a bunch of bass patches down here. One patch doing this. And then another patch doing this. And then another patch doing this. And then for some reason, I have this patch doing this same thing twice. I think it might be like tiny bit different, but basically it's the same patch doing the same thing twice. And I don't know, if you turn one off, it basically sounds the same. So it's probably a mistake on my part, but whatever, it worked out, I guess. This one here is, these are basically all FM patches, taking one thing, FMing it to another thing, adding some filter movement, adding some effects, and you end up with sound. And I think these are all being processed through this group here. I've been using Ozone 11 a lot lately, actually, for various things. I think this one's just being used for widening, but I've been using their EQ matching thing a lot, and I'm using texture here, it looks like, to add some white noise to these. Yeah, that actually adds quite a lot. And then I'm using Virtual Riot's Fat Rack and his Hyper Chorus. If we turn these off, you get this. Yeah, basically if you turn all of this processing off, it kind of becomes a lot less exciting. And it looks like I'm using an LFO here to sort of mess around with these delay times a little bit, just to give it some like interesting stereo information. And then the last thing I want to talk about here is this last section, which I also really like, which sounds like this. So this is a bass also that Virtual Riot made. It's kind of an interesting patch. It's this wavetable that I assume he made somehow, and it's just pitched down really low. So if we play it, and it has basically pitch bend information in the MIDI clip. So if we play it, you get this kind of movement where it sounds like it's looping in a sampler and slowing down. But if we pitch this up, it just sounds kind of like a normal sound. Like it's more tonal, but you can kind of hear the clickiness of it. And if you pitch, so basically by pitching it down, you just hear the like resetting point of that waveform or wavetable, whatever you want to call it, over and over again. So if we pitch it down even further, say by 2 more octaves, it'll just do the same thing, but slower. So yeah, kind of an interesting sound and an interesting way to make a patch. So I took those and I rendered them into audio just because they seem to never be the exact same twice. So I rendered a bunch and then just took the one that I thought that sounded the most normal, if there is such a thing with this sound. And then I decided I wanted to basically have the drums match all of the movement in this thing. So if you render it to audio, one of the benefits is that you can kind of see where all the transients are. So, you can see there's a transient here, there's a transient here, there's a transient here, etc. If we play it and watch it at the same time, you can kind of see the movement as you listen to it. So what I did is I just took a version of this and I think I copied it up here into the drum group, and I kind of just used that as like a visual thing to build the drums off. So if we take a look here at all of these drums, you can see pretty much all of them land right here on one of these transients. So instead of using the musical grid, like, the normal grid that you would use here that Ableton gives you, I just kind of turned it off and just matched it up to this bass sound. I kind of really, this one's a little bit off. I kind of really like the effect that it has when the drums match that kind of weird bass rhythm and everything. So if we just play the drums on their own, they sound like this. So that's basically how I made that bit. These are just sort of random samples I found, random hi-hats, random toms, whatever, just like various drum samples. I really like this tweaker too. I feel like the tweaker really sets it off. So yeah, that's basically how I made this remix. Hopefully you learned some things from that and found it interesting. And yeah. Have a good one.